Emirates 521, go around, go around. The urgent command crackles through the radio as 300 passengers and crew aboard the massive Boeing 777 face what would become one of the most harrowing crash landings in modern aviation history. August 3, 2016, Dubai International Airport. The scorching desert sun beats down mercilessly as Flight 521 approaches what should have been a routine landing after its journey from Thiruvananthapuram, India. But in the next few terrifying minutes, this routine flight would transform into a nightmare of twisted metal, roaring flames, and split-second decisions that would determine who lived and who died. What happened in those final moments? How did 299 souls manage to escape the inferno, while one brave captain made the ultimate sacrifice? This is the story of courage, tragedy, and the razor-thin line between survival and death at 35,000 feet. The investigation that followed would uncover shocking details about the final seconds before impact, the heroic actions of flight attendants who risked everything to save passengers, and the devastating choices that turned a routine approach into aviation history's most miraculous survival story. Emirates Flight 521 was operated by one of the world's most prestigious airlines, known for its impeccable safety record and luxury service spanning over 3 decades of operation. The Boeing 777-300, registration A6EMW, was a relatively young aircraft delivered to Emirates in 2003, representing the pinnacle of aviation technology, with its fly-by-wire flight controls, advanced weather radar, and redundant safety systems. Powered by 2 massive Rolls-Royce Trent 800 engines, each producing 84,700 pounds of thrust, this particular aircraft had accumulated over 58,000 flight hours, serving routes across Emirates' global network without a single significant incident. The plane had undergone its most recent major maintenance check just 6 weeks prior to the accident, with all systems certified as airworthy and functioning perfectly. Captain Khalid Al-Shebli, a seasoned pilot with over 7,000 flight hours and 15 years of experience with Emirates, commanded the aircraft with the quiet confidence that comes from thousands of successful landings. His logbook showed extensive experience on the Boeing 777, including challenging approaches into airports across the Middle East, Asia, and Africa, where weather conditions and airport infrastructure often tested pilot skills to their limits. First Officer Nidin Sasidaran Nair, who had accumulated more than 5,500 hours of flying experience, brought a complementary skill set to the cockpit, with his background in engineering and his reputation for meticulous attention to detail during flight operations. The 34-year-old Indian pilot had joined Emirates 5 years earlier after serving with Indian Airlines, and his colleagues consistently praised his calm demeanor and technical expertise during challenging flight conditions. Together, Captain Al-Shebli and First Officer Nair formed one of Emirates' most experienced flight crews, their combined expertise representing nearly 13,000 hours of commercial aviation experience. The cabin crew consisted of 16 dedicated flight attendants from 8 different countries, led by senior cabin manager Yassim Al-Zabi, whose 12 years with Emirates had included extensive training in emergency procedures and crisis management. Each flight attendant had undergone rigorous training that included firefighting, first aid, water survival, and evacuation procedures, spending countless hours in simulators practicing the very scenarios they would soon face in terrifying reality. The crew had worked together on multiple flights over the past month, developing the teamwork and communication skills that would prove absolutely critical in the minutes ahead. Flight 521 had departed Thiruvananthapuram International Airport in Kerala, India, at 10:19 a.m. local time, carrying 282 passengers from 20 different nationalities and 18 crew members on what was scheduled to be a routine 2-hour and 40-minute flight to Dubai. The passenger manifest told the stories of diverse lives intersecting in the shared experience of air travel. Families returning from vacation in Kerala's lush backwaters, business travelers heading to meetings in Dubai's towering financial district, expatriate workers returning to jobs in the UAE's booming economy, and tourists eager to experience Dubai's legendary shopping and entertainment offerings. Among them were children as young as 2 years old traveling with their parents, elderly passengers in their 70s making what might be their final international journey, newlyweds heading home from their honeymoon, and seasoned travelers for whom this flight represented just another routine day in their global lifestyle. The passenger cabin buzzed with conversations in Arabic, English, Hindi, Malayalam, and a dozen other languages, creating the cosmopolitan atmosphere that characterizes flights through Dubai's role as a global aviation hub connecting East and West. All 300 souls aboard trusted their lives to the experienced crew and the advanced technology of the Boeing 777, unaware that their routine Wednesday afternoon flight would soon test every safety system, training protocol, and emergency procedure that the aviation industry had developed over decades of learning from tragedy. The flight had progressed normally for the first 2 hours and 15 minutes, cruising at 37,000 feet over the sparkling blue waters of the Arabian Sea, as passengers enjoyed Emirates' renowned in-flight service, featuring gourmet meals, extensive entertainment systems, and the attentive care of flight attendants who anticipated every need. The cabin service had proceeded flawlessly, with lunch served efficiently and passengers settling into the comfortable rhythm of long-distance travel, many dozing in their seats or watching movies on the personal entertainment screens. Children played quietly while their parents relaxed. Business travelers worked on laptops, and the elderly passengers gazed out windows at the endless expanse of sea and sky that stretched to every horizon. Captain Al-Shebli had made his routine passenger announcement 30 minutes before scheduled arrival, informing everyone that they were beginning their descent into Dubai with excellent weather conditions and an on-time arrival expected at Gate C9. Dubai International Airport was experiencing typical summer conditions that fateful afternoon, with the temperature having soared to a brutal 48 degrees Celsius, creating intense thermal activity that would prove to be a crucial factor in the unfolding disaster. The extreme heat radiating from the concrete runways and taxiways created powerful convection currents that rose thousands of feet into the atmosphere, generating invisible rivers of turbulent air that could dramatically affect aircraft performance during the critical phases of takeoff and landing. The airport's meteorological department had issued routine advisories about the high temperatures and associated wind shear possibilities, but such conditions were considered normal for Dubai during the peak summer months. The airport's runway 12L, where Flight 521 was cleared to land, stretched 4,000 meters across the desert landscape, its concrete surface baking in the relentless sun, and more than adequate for the Boeing 777's landing requirements under normal circumstances. However, the extreme temperature would reduce air density and affect both engine performance and aerodynamic efficiency, factors that would become critically important in the minutes ahead. Air traffic control had cleared multiple aircraft for approach throughout the afternoon, with Flight 521 following normal procedures as it began its descent toward one of the world's busiest airports, handling over 1,000 aircraft movements daily. The Dubai Tower controllers, monitoring multiple aircraft simultaneously, noted Flight 521's position on their radar screens as routine traffic inbound from India, one of hundreds of flights they would handle that day without incident. The crew had reviewed the weather conditions and approach procedures during their descent briefing, noting the high temperature and associated performance considerations, but finding nothing unusual enough to warrant significant concern or deviation from standard procedures. The Automatic Terminal Information Service had broadcast current conditions including the extreme temperature, light and variable winds, and excellent visibility, all factors that suggested a routine approach and landing despite the challenging thermal environment. As the aircraft descended through 10,000 feet, Dubai Approach Control provided vectors for the Instrument Landing System approach to runway 12L, with visibility reported at 10 kilometers and winds light and variable, conditions that appeared favorable for a normal landing. The passengers began the familiar pre-landing routine of stowing personal items, adjusting seat backs to their upright positions, and securing tray tables as the cabin crew performed their methodical pre-landing safety checks throughout the passenger compartment. The familiar sounds of the landing gear extending and flaps deploying signaled the beginning of what everyone expected to be another successful Emirates arrival in Dubai, the distinctive hydraulic whining and mechanical chunking sounds that seasoned travelers recognize as the normal symphony of aircraft preparation for landing. Flight attendants moved through the aisles with practiced efficiency, ensuring passenger compliance with safety regulations while maintaining the warm, professional demeanor that Emirates was famous for worldwide. In the cockpit, Captain Al-Shebli and First Officer Nair worked through their detailed approach checklist with the methodical precision that had made them both respected aviators. Each item verified and confirmed as they prepared their aircraft for what should have been routine touchdown. The Boeing 777's sophisticated flight management system displayed all the parameters they needed: approach speed, landing weight, runway conditions, and weather data, all indicating a normal arrival into one of the world's most advanced airports. Neither pilot had any reason to suspect that the next few minutes would transform their routine flight into a fight for survival that would test every skill they had learned and every procedure they had practiced throughout their aviation careers. The approach initially proceeded according to standard procedures as Flight 521 descended toward runway 12L through the superheated desert air that shimmered with thermal energy rising from the sun-baked landscape below. Captain Al-Shebli and First Officer Nair methodically worked through their landing checklist with the professional competence that had earned them both spotless safety records, monitoring airspeed, altitude, and approach path as the massive Boeing 777 glided through air that was significantly less dense than the standard atmosphere used for aircraft performance calculations. The reduced air density, a consequence of the extreme heat, meant that the aircraft would require higher ground speeds to maintain the same indicated airspeeds, and the engines would produce less thrust at any given power setting, factors that would become critically important as events unfolded. At 2,400 feet above ground level, Dubai Tower cleared Flight 521 for landing with the routine professionalism that characterizes thousands of daily aircraft movements, and the crew acknowledged the clearance with the calm confidence that comes from years of successful operations. The aircraft was properly configured for landing with gear extended, flaps at landing setting, and all systems functioning normally according to the comprehensive array of instruments and warning systems that monitored every aspect of the Boeing 777's complex systems. However, as Flight 521 continued its approach below 1,000 feet above ground level, the crew encountered an unexpected challenge that would set in motion a catastrophic chain of events that neither their training nor experience had fully prepared them to handle. The intense heat radiating from the desert surface created powerful thermal currents and wind shear conditions that began affecting the aircraft's descent profile in ways that were initially subtle, but would become increasingly dangerous with each passing second. The Boeing 777 started experiencing significant turbulence and updrafts that pushed the aircraft above the normal 3-degree glide path, forcing the sophisticated autopilot system to make continuous corrections in an attempt to maintain the proper approach angle toward the runway threshold. These thermal effects, while not uncommon in hot weather operations, were particularly intense due to the extreme temperature and the way the heat interacted with Dubai's concrete infrastructure to create unusually strong convective currents. Air traffic controllers monitoring the approach on their precision approach radar noticed that Flight 521's altitude was slightly higher than normal for its distance from the runway, but the deviation was still within acceptable parameters and did not warrant any immediate intervention or warning to the crew. The thermal currents continued to affect the aircraft as it descended through 500 feet, creating a phenomenon known as floating, where the aircraft seemed reluctant to descend at the normal rate, despite the crew's inputs and the autopilot's attempts to maintain the proper glide path. Captain Al-Shebli, sensing that something was not quite right with the approach, disconnected the autopilot and took manual control of the aircraft, applying his years of experience in challenging approach conditions to compensate for the unusual atmospheric effects. The heat-induced turbulence was creating a washboard effect on the aircraft, with alternating updrafts and downdrafts that made precise control increasingly difficult as the runway grew larger in the windscreen. First Officer Nair, fulfilling his crucial role as the monitoring pilot, called out altitude and airspeed readings with increasing frequency, as both pilots recognized that the approach was becoming more challenging than anticipated. The passengers, most of whom had no awareness of the crew's growing concern, continued their pre-landing preparations, while a few nervous flyers noticed the increased turbulence and wondered if it was normal for approaches into Dubai during the hot summer months. As Flight 521 crossed the runway threshold, it became evident to both pilots that the aircraft was significantly higher than the normal touchdown zone, floating on a cushion of superheated air that seemed determined to keep the massive Boeing 777 airborne despite their attempts to bring it down to the runway surface. The aircraft continued to float above the runway surface as Captain Al Shebley attempted to salvage the landing, reducing power and adjusting the aircraft's attitude to encourage touchdown. But the combination of thermal effects and the aircraft's energy state was working against his efforts. The runway markers flashed beneath them with alarming speed as precious landing distance was consumed, while the aircraft remained stubbornly airborne, creating a situation that was rapidly evolving from unusual to dangerous. The combination of excess altitude, the ground effect phenomenon that was enhanced by the extreme heat radiating from the concrete runway, and the aircraft's heavy landing weight created a perfect storm of factors that made the Boeing 777 seem reluctant to settle onto the runway surface despite the crew's best efforts. First Officer Nair called out altitude and airspeed readings as they watched the runway distance remaining markers flash beneath them, both pilots realizing with growing alarm that they were rapidly running out of runway for a safe landing roll, even if they managed to touch down immediately. The aircraft finally made contact with the runway, approximately 100 meters past the normal touchdown zone, far beyond the point where a safe landing could be completed with the remaining runway distance available. Captain Al Shebley immediately recognized the gravity of the situation, with the instantaneous decision-making ability that separates competent pilots from exceptional ones. Understanding that attempting to stop the aircraft on the remaining runway would likely result in an overrun into the construction area beyond the runway end. The Boeing 777 touched down firmly, but was still carrying significant energy. And even with maximum braking and reverse thrust, the physics of the situation made a successful stop highly unlikely given the reduced runway distance remaining. Without hesitation, Captain Al Shebley made the critical decision that would determine the fate of everyone aboard, pushing the thrust levers forward and commanding, go around," in a voice that conveyed both urgency and professional control. The powerful Trent 800 engines began spooling up from their reduced landing power setting as the crew immediately initiated the missed approach procedure they had practiced countless times in simulators, but hoped never to use in real-world conditions. However, they were already committed to a perilous situation with little room for error, attempting to transform a landing aircraft into a climbing aircraft while operating in the most challenging phase of flight. The go-around maneuver, which is normally a routine procedure practiced countless times in simulators and considered a standard tool in every pilot's repertoire, became a desperate fight for survival as Flight 521 struggled to gain altitude and airspeed while configured for landing rather than climbing. The Boeing 777's massive engines were producing maximum thrust, their Rolls-Royce Trent power plants delivering every pound of available force. But the aircraft was still dangerously close to the ground with landing gear extended and flaps deployed in the landing configuration, creating enormous drag that hindered acceleration and climb performance. The extreme heat that had contributed to the long landing was now working against the engines, reducing their thrust output by several thousand pounds compared to standard atmospheric conditions, while the aircraft's heavy landing weight meant that achieving a positive rate of climb required maximum performance from every system. Air traffic controllers in the Dubai Tower watched in mounting alarm as the aircraft's radar return showed it climbing much slower than normal for a go-around maneuver. The combination of heavy configuration, extreme heat, and high gross weight working against the crew's efforts to gain altitude and clear the obstacles ahead. The controller immediately cleared all other traffic from the runway and approach path, recognizing that Flight 521 was in serious trouble and might need to attempt another immediate landing. Captain Al Shebley and First Officer Nair worked frantically to configure the aircraft for the go-around, following the memory items and published procedures while fighting against time and physics in their struggle to transform their Boeing 777 from a landing aircraft into a climbing aircraft. The go-around procedure required raising the flaps from full landing position to a climb setting, retracting the landing gear, and advancing the engines to maximum thrust. But each of these actions had to be performed in the correct sequence and timing to avoid further degrading the aircraft's performance. First Officer Nair called out airspeeds and altitudes while Captain Al Shebley focused on maintaining control of the aircraft. Both pilots acutely aware that they were operating in the most dangerous region of the flight envelope, where any mistake could be fatal. The passengers, initially unaware of the unfolding crisis, began to sense something was seriously wrong as they felt the aircraft's engines surge to full power with an intensity they had never experienced before, accompanied by unusual attitudes, sounds, and vibrations that suggested this was far from a normal flight operation. The sudden application of maximum thrust created a deafening roar throughout the cabin as the Trent engines strained to provide the power needed to lift the heavy aircraft away from the ground. Flight attendants, trained to remain calm in emergencies and maintain passenger confidence during unusual situations, began quietly preparing for possible emergency procedures while maintaining their professional composure to avoid triggering panic among the passengers who were already becoming increasingly anxious. Senior cabin manager Jassim Al-Zabi discreetly signaled to his crew to assume emergency positions and prepare for possible evacuation procedures, their years of training taking over as they recognized the signs of a developing emergency situation. The aircraft managed to climb to approximately 85 feet above the ground, fighting against the massive drag created by its landing configuration and the reduced engine performance in the extreme heat, when disaster struck with terrifying suddenness that transformed everyone's worst fears into horrifying reality. The radio crackled with urgent communications as air traffic control coordinated emergency services and cleared airspace, while in the cockpit, both pilots focused every ounce of their skill and experience on the impossible task of making their damaged aircraft fly. Without warning, the Boeing 777's tail section struck the runway surface with tremendous force, sending a shower of sparks and debris into the scorching desert air while creating a sound that passengers would later describe as indescribably horrific. The impact was catastrophic, shearing away portions of the aircraft's lower fuselage and damaging critical flight control systems that were essential for maintaining control of the massive aircraft. Captain Al-Shebli felt the aircraft shudder violently as control surfaces were damaged and multiple hydraulic systems began failing simultaneously, his hands and feet working frantically on the controls as he tried to maintain some semblance of control over the disintegrating aircraft. The stick shaker activated immediately, warning of an impending stall as the damaged aircraft struggled to maintain lift with its compromised aerodynamics and the severe disruption to airflow caused by the structural damage. Warning lights and alarms filled the cockpit as multiple systems registered failures, creating a cascade of emergency indications that threatened to overwhelm even experienced pilots trained to handle multiple system failures. "We're going down," someone shouted over the intercom system as the crippled Boeing 777 began settling back toward the runway, despite the engines still producing full thrust in their desperate attempt to keep the aircraft airborne. The landing gear, which had been in the process of retracting during the go-around attempt, was severely damaged by the initial ground contact and remained partially extended, creating additional drag and aerodynamic instability that made the aircraft even more difficult to control. The partially retracted gear also created an asymmetric condition that introduced rolling and yawing moments that Captain Al-Shebli had to counter with control inputs while simultaneously dealing with the loss of hydraulic systems and flight control authority. First Officer Nair frantically worked through emergency checklists while maintaining his primary duty of monitoring airspeed and altitude, calling out critical information to Captain Al-Shebli while trying to identify and isolate the failing systems that were rapidly degrading their ability to control the aircraft. The passengers now fully realized the gravity of their situation as they felt the violent vibrations throughout the airframe and heard the grinding sounds of metal tearing away from the fuselage, accompanied by the unmistakable sounds of structural failure that no amount of training or preparation could have prepared them for. Flight attendants immediately began shouting evacuation commands and positioning themselves at emergency exits, their extensive training taking over as they prepared for what they knew was an inevitable second impact with the ground. The cabin filled with the acrid smell of smoke and burning materials as electrical systems, short-circuited and hydraulic fluid leaked onto hot engine components, creating a toxic environment that added urgency to every action and decision. Parents grabbed their children, while elderly passengers struggled to understand the rapidly developing emergency. The multilingual announcements from flight attendants cutting through the noise and confusion as they directed everyone to assume brace positions and prepare for emergency evacuation. The aircraft's emergency lighting system activated automatically as smoke began obscuring normal cabin lighting, casting an eerie red glow throughout the passenger compartment as flight attendants moved with practiced efficiency to prepare for the evacuation that they knew would begin within seconds of the aircraft coming to rest. Outside, airport emergency services had been alerted and were racing toward the anticipated crash site, their crews knowing that the first few minutes after impact would be crucial in determining how many lives could be saved from what was clearly going to be a catastrophic accident. Flight 521 struck the runway a second time with devastating force that sent shockwaves throughout the aircraft and created a sound that witnesses described as unlike anything they had ever heard before, the impact crushing the remaining landing gear structures and causing the aircraft to begin sliding along the concrete surface in a cascade of sparks and grinding metal that marked the beginning of one of aviation's most remarkable survival stories. The Boeing 777's right engine, still producing full thrust in the crew's desperate attempt to maintain flight, dug into the runway surface and was torn from its mounting with tremendous force, rupturing fuel lines and igniting a massive fireball that engulfed the starboard side of the aircraft in flames that reached hundreds of feet into the air. The intense heat from the burning jet fuel, fed by thousands of gallons of aviation kerosene, created an immediate life-threatening environment as toxic smoke began filling the passenger cabin, and the external fire spread rapidly along the aircraft's aluminum structure. Captain Al Shebley, showing extraordinary composure and professionalism even as his aircraft disintegrated around him and flames licked at the cockpit windows, continued fighting to maintain some semblance of control as the plane slid down the runway like a massive flaming toboggan. The left engine also separated from the wing during the violent ground contact, eliminating the aircraft's remaining power source but mercifully reducing the fuel flow that was feeding the growing inferno that threatened to consume the entire aircraft. The engine separation created additional debris fields along the runway, as massive pieces of turbofan engine scattered across the concrete, some pieces weighing thousands of pounds and traveling at high speed away from the main wreckage. Emergency vehicles that had been positioned strategically around the airport for exactly this type of situation immediately raced toward the burning wreckage, their crews knowing from training and experience that every second would be crucial in determining how many lives could be saved from the inferno that was rapidly consuming the Boeing 777. Fire trucks carrying thousands of gallons of specialized aviation firefighting foam began applying suppression agents even as they approached the moving wreckage, their crews coordinating with air traffic control and airport operations to ensure the fastest possible response to what was clearly a mass casualty emergency requiring every available resource. Inside the cabin, passengers found themselves in a nightmare scenario that no amount of safety briefings or emergency instructions could have prepared them for, surrounded by twisted metal, billowing smoke, and rapidly rising temperatures that threatened to overcome them before they could reach the emergency exits. The aircraft's sophisticated emergency lighting system activated automatically, providing crucial illumination through the smoke-filled cabin as flight attendants began the most important and challenging work of their careers. The passenger cabin, designed to protect occupants during crashes, had maintained its structural integrity despite the violent impact and sliding motion, providing the crucial time needed for evacuation procedures to begin. However, the rapidly spreading fire and increasing smoke concentration meant that every second of delay could mean the difference between life and death for the 282 passengers and 18 crew members who now found themselves in the fight of their lives. Flight attendants could hear the roar of flames outside the aircraft and feel the increasing heat through the cabin walls, knowing that their window of opportunity for successful evacuation was measured in minutes rather than hours. The evacuation of Flight 521 became a desperate race against time as the aircraft's interior rapidly filled with toxic smoke from burning plastics, fabrics, and electrical components, while the external fire spread along the fuselage and threatened to breach the passenger compartment. Senior cabin manager Jassim Al-Zabi, drawing upon 12 years of emergency training and crisis management experience, took immediate charge of the evacuation procedures and began directing his crew to open emergency exits and deploy evacuation slides while maintaining order among the increasingly panicked passengers who could see flames outside the windows and feel the heat building inside the cabin. The portside exits were quickly opened and slides deployed, but the starboard side exits were completely unusable due to the intense fire and smoke that engulfed that entire side of the aircraft, effectively reducing the available evacuation capacity by half and creating a potentially fatal bottleneck. Flight attendants had to make split-second decisions about which exits could be safely used while simultaneously helping passengers who were struggling with seatbelts, gathering personal belongings, or frozen with fear in the face of the unfolding disaster. Passengers began sliding down the emergency chutes in a desperate stream of humanity, many leaving behind all their possessions, including passports, money, and irreplaceable personal items, as they fled for their lives through the narrow exit doors and down the steep slides that seemed impossibly small given the urgency of their situation. The evacuation slides, designed to handle a steady flow of passengers during planned evacuations, were overwhelmed by the desperate rush of people trying to escape the burning aircraft, leading to pile-ups at the bottom of slides and injuries as passengers landed awkwardly in their haste to get away from the flames. Flight attendant Fatima Al-Kabi remained at her assigned exit, despite the increasing heat and smoke, physically helping elderly passengers and small children navigate the steep slides, while smoke stung her eyes and throat and made breathing increasingly difficult. Her colleagues throughout the cabin demonstrated similar heroism, staying at their posts and helping passengers, even as conditions inside the aircraft became life-threatening and their own escape routes became more limited with each passing second. The heroic cabin crew worked with incredible efficiency and selflessness, their years of training and natural professionalism saving countless lives as they guided passengers toward available exits, helped those who had fallen or become disoriented, and maintained some semblance of order in what could easily have become a deadly stampede. Many passengers later credited the calm commands and physical assistance of the flight attendants with helping them find exits in the smoke-filled confusion of the emergency evacuation, particularly elderly passengers and those traveling with small children who needed extra assistance to navigate the chaotic conditions. The crew's ability to remain calm and professional while facing mortal danger themselves became one of the defining aspects of the Flight 521 survival story, demonstrating the highest traditions of aviation professionalism and human courage under extreme circumstances. Within minutes, streams of passengers were sliding down the deployed chutes onto the scorching runway tarmac, where ground personnel and emergency responders helped guide them to safety, away from the burning wreckage, and the intense, radiant heat that was making the immediate area around the aircraft nearly unbearable. The evacuation process revealed both the strengths and limitations of aircraft emergency systems, as passengers struggled with the height and steepness of the slides, the difficulty of maintaining order during emergency conditions, and the challenge of moving nearly 300 people through a limited number of exits in smoke-filled conditions. Some passengers suffered injuries during the evacuation, including broken bones from hard landings at the bottom of slides, smoke inhalation from prolonged exposure to cabin smoke, and burns from contact with hot surfaces as they escaped the aircraft. However, the evacuation was proceeding with remarkable efficiency given the circumstances, with flight attendants maintaining their positions and continuing to assist passengers, even as smoke inhalation began affecting their own ability to function effectively. The sound of the evacuation was chaotic and frightening, with people shouting instructions in multiple languages, children crying, adults calling for family members, and the constant background roar of the fire that continued to consume the aircraft's structure while emergency vehicles worked to control the blaze. Captain Khalid al-Shabli, following the aviation tradition that requires the captain to be the last person to leave his aircraft and ensure all passengers and crew have evacuated safely, remained at his post in the cockpit to coordinate with air traffic control and emergency responders while providing crucial information about the aircraft's configuration, passenger count, and any hazardous materials aboard. As the cockpit filled with smoke and the heat became unbearable, with temperatures rising to levels that made breathing extremely difficult and visibility nearly zero, he continued his duties with the professionalism and dedication that had marked his entire 15-year career with Emirates. The cockpit, located at the front of the aircraft and somewhat isolated from the main cabin evacuation routes, was becoming increasingly smoke-filled as the aircraft's ventilation systems failed and external fires began affecting the flight deck environment.
Captain al-Shabli maintained radio communication with Dubai Tower and emergency services as long as possible, providing vital information about the evacuation progress and the aircraft's condition that would help emergency responders plan their rescue operations more effectively.
First Officer Nair had successfully evacuated through one of the cockpit's emergency exit windows, following standard procedures that called for the co-pilot to evacuate first so that he could assist the captain from outside the aircraft if necessary. However, Captain Al-Shebli faced the agonizing decision of when to abandon his aircraft and attempt his own escape, knowing that his departure would mark the end of direct communication with the aircraft, and that any passengers or crew still trapped inside would be entirely dependent on external rescue efforts. The smoke in the cockpit had become so dense that visibility was essentially zero, and the rising temperature indicated that the fire was spreading rapidly through the aircraft's structure, making the flight deck environment increasingly untenable for human survival. The captain's training and instincts told him to remain as long as possible to coordinate rescue efforts and provide information to emergency services, but his survival instincts warned him that he was rapidly approaching the point where escape would become impossible due to the deteriorating conditions. Airport firefighters had arrived within minutes of the initial impact and were directing massive streams of specialized aviation firefighting foam and thousands of gallons of water onto the burning Boeing 777. But the intense heat generated by burning jet fuel and the continuous fuel flow from ruptured lines made their task incredibly challenging and dangerous. The firefighting foam, designed specifically for aviation fuel fires, began to suppress some of the external flames, but the fire had already penetrated into the aircraft's internal structure where traditional firefighting methods were less effective. Fire crews had positioned high-reach ladders against the aircraft to assist with evacuation and rescue operations. But the intense heat and continuing fire made close approach to the aircraft extremely dangerous for rescue personnel. The coordination between multiple emergency agencies, including airport fire services, Dubai Civil Defense, police, and medical personnel, demonstrated the effectiveness of emergency planning and training, but everyone involved knew that time was running out for anyone still trapped inside the burning aircraft. Captain Al-Shebli, overcome by smoke inhalation and the extreme heat conditions in the cockpit that had reached levels incompatible with human survival, finally attempted to escape through the cockpit windows using emergency escape procedures that he had practiced numerous times during training but never expected to use in real conditions. The cockpit emergency exits, while adequate for normal emergency situations, were extremely challenging to use in the smoke-filled, high-temperature environment that now existed inside the flight deck. Tragically, despite the heroic and immediate efforts of firefighters and emergency personnel who had positioned rescue ladders against the aircraft and were attempting to reach him, Captain Al-Shebli succumbed to smoke inhalation and heat exposure before he could be successfully rescued from the burning cockpit. His sacrifice ensured that all 299 other souls aboard Flight 521 survived the catastrophic accident, making him a hero whose dedication to duty and refusal to abandon his responsibilities cost him his life, but saved everyone else aboard the aircraft. The loss of Captain Al-Shebli became a defining tragedy within what was otherwise aviation's most successful large-scale evacuation, his death serving as a stark reminder of the risks that airline pilots accept every time they take command of an aircraft filled with passengers who trust them with their lives. His final radio transmissions, recorded by air traffic control, revealed a man who remained calm and professional even as his aircraft disintegrated around him and his own survival became increasingly unlikely. The captain's adherence to aviation's highest traditions of putting passenger safety above personal survival became an inspiration to pilots worldwide and a testament to the professionalism that characterizes the best of commercial aviation. Emergency responders later recovered his body from the cockpit, after firefighters finally gained control of the blaze several hours after the accident, finding evidence that he had continued trying to coordinate evacuation efforts even as conditions in the cockpit became unsurvivable. The immediate aftermath of Emirates Flight 521 revealed the extraordinary effectiveness of modern aircraft design, crew training, and emergency response procedures when they functioned as intended under the most extreme circumstances imaginable. All 282 passengers and 17 of the 18 crew members survived the catastrophic crash, fire, and evacuation, with injuries ranging from minor smoke inhalation and evacuation-related bruises to more serious conditions, including broken bones sustained during the emergency slide evacuations and moderate smoke inhalation requiring hospitalization. The Boeing 777's robust cabin structure had protected the occupants during the violent ground impacts and sliding motion, providing the crucial time needed for evacuation procedures to be completed before fire penetrated the passenger compartment. The aircraft's emergency systems, including lighting, communication, and structural integrity, had performed exactly as designed, giving passengers and crew the tools they needed to survive an otherwise catastrophic accident. Airport emergency services, who had practiced countless scenarios exactly like this one during regular training exercises, responded with remarkable efficiency and coordination, arriving at the scene within the target response time and immediately beginning rescue operations with equipment and procedures specifically designed for large aircraft accidents. The evacuation was completed in less than 7 minutes from the time the aircraft came to rest, a testament to the crew's professionalism and the effectiveness of safety procedures that are practiced regularly but hoped never to be used in real emergencies. Medical personnel were immediately available to treat injured passengers and crew, with ambulances and medical helicopters standing by to transport the most seriously injured to Dubai's advanced trauma centers. The coordination between airport emergency services, Dubai Civil Defense, police, and medical personnel demonstrated years of planning and training paying off when it mattered most. The survival of 299 people from such a catastrophic accident represented one of aviation's greatest success stories, demonstrating that decades of safety improvements, training enhancements, and emergency preparedness could indeed save lives when everything went wrong simultaneously. Passengers who had faced almost certain death when the aircraft caught fire found themselves standing safely on the tarmac within minutes, many unable to believe they had survived such a terrifying ordeal. The psychological impact on survivors was significant, with many requiring counseling and support to deal with the trauma of experiencing such a close encounter with death. But the physical survival rate was a testament to everyone who had contributed to making commercial aviation as safe as possible. Family members around the world who had initially feared the worst when news of the accident spread were able to celebrate the survival of their loved ones, creating countless individual stories of relief and gratitude within the larger narrative of the accident. The official investigation conducted by the UAE General Civil Aviation Authority, with assistance from the U.S. National Transportation Safety Board, Boeing, Rolls-Royce, and other international aviation authorities, revealed a complex series of factors that contributed to the accident and provided valuable lessons for the entire aviation industry. The primary cause was determined to be the crew's delayed decision to initiate the go-around maneuver, combined with the challenging environmental conditions created by the extreme heat in Dubai that day, which had reduced air density and created powerful thermal currents that affected the aircraft's approach characteristics. The investigation found that thermal effects and wind shear associated with the 48 degrees Celsius temperature had significantly affected the aircraft's approach profile, causing it to float above the runway surface longer than normal and consuming crucial runway distance needed for a safe landing roll. While the crew's ultimate decision to execute a go-around was correct and appropriate given their position on the runway, the delayed timing of the decision meant the aircraft was already in a critical flight regime when the maneuver was initiated, with insufficient altitude and energy to successfully complete the procedure. The detailed investigation report also highlighted the challenges of performing go-around procedures from low altitude, with heavy aircraft operating in high-temperature conditions, where reduced air density affects both engine performance and aerodynamic efficiency in ways that significantly degrade. The detailed investigation report also highlighted the challenges of performing go-around procedures from low altitude with heavy aircraft operating in high-temperature conditions, where reduced air density affects both engine performance and aerodynamic efficiency in ways that significantly degrade aircraft climb performance and extend the time required to achieve a safe altitude above ground obstacles. The investigation team conducted extensive computer modeling and flight simulations to understand exactly how the combination of factors had created such a challenging situation for the crew, revealing that the thermal conditions on that particular day were among the most severe ever recorded at Dubai International Airport. The report praised the exceptional performance of the cabin crew during the evacuation, noting that their actions were directly responsible for the survival of all passengers and that their adherence to emergency procedures under extreme stress represented the gold standard for cabin crew performance during aircraft emergencies. Investigators found that the evacuation procedures had worked almost flawlessly despite the challenging conditions, with flight attendants demonstrating remarkable composure and effectiveness, while guiding passengers to safety through smoke-filled cabins and around obstacles created by the aircraft's damaged structure. The report made several specific recommendations regarding go-around training scenarios, thermal condition awareness for pilots operating in hot climates, and cockpit resource management during critical phases of flight, when environmental factors might affect aircraft performance in unexpected ways. Boeing was asked to review its flight training recommendations for high-temperature operations, while engine manufacturer Rolls-Royce provided additional data about engine performance degradation in extreme heat conditions. The investigation also led to enhanced weather reporting at airports in hot climates, with more detailed information about thermal conditions and wind shear potential being provided to flight crews during approach briefings. The tragedy of Emirates Flight 521 led to significant and lasting changes in how airlines around the world train pilots for go-around procedures and approach management in challenging environmental conditions that had previously been considered routine. Emirates immediately implemented enhanced simulator training scenarios that specifically addressed high-temperature operations and the unique challenges of flying heavy aircraft in Middle Eastern summer conditions, where temperatures regularly exceed 45 degrees Celsius and create atmospheric conditions that can dramatically affect aircraft performance. The accident highlighted the critical importance of early go-around decisions and led to revised standard operating procedures throughout the aviation industry that emphasized initiating missed approaches much earlier in the approach phase when any conditions deviated from normal parameters. Flight training organizations worldwide began incorporating the lessons of Flight 521 into their curricula, with particular emphasis on energy management during approach phases and understanding the subtle ways that environmental factors can affect aircraft performance and handling characteristics. Aviation authorities in hot climate regions, including the Middle East, Australia, India, and parts of Africa and the Americas, studied the accident extensively and incorporated its lessons into training requirements for commercial pilots, particularly focusing on the physics of high-temperature operations and how extreme heat affects everything from engine performance to aerodynamic efficiency. The heroism displayed by the cabin crew became a detailed case study in effective emergency management that is now taught in flight attendant training programs around the world, with their procedures and actions during the evacuation analyzed and incorporated into emergency response training for cabin crew members globally. Airlines also conducted comprehensive reviews of their evacuation procedures and slide deployment protocols, leading to enhanced training for flight attendants in smoke-filled and high-temperature environments where visibility is limited and time is critically important for passenger survival. The accident reinforced the critical importance of crew resource management and the need for clear communication and decision-making during emergency situations where multiple factors are creating compound challenges that require immediate and effective responses. Training programs now place greater emphasis on scenario-based learning, where crews practice handling multiple simultaneous challenges, including equipment failures, environmental factors, and time-critical decision-making under extreme stress. The investigation's findings about thermal effects on aircraft performance led to improved weather detection and reporting systems at airports in hot climates, giving pilots better information about conditions that might affect their aircraft's performance during critical phases of flight, such as takeoff and landing. Modern flight training now includes extensive education about density-altitude effects, thermal turbulence recognition, and go-around decision-making in challenging environmental conditions. The psychological aspects of the accident also received significant attention from aviation psychologists and safety experts who studied how extreme stress affected both crew performance and passenger behavior during the emergency evacuation. Their research led to improved training methods that better prepare crew members for the sensory overload and decision-making challenges they might face during real emergencies, while also developing better techniques for managing passenger behavior during evacuation procedures. The accident became a watershed moment in aviation safety, demonstrating that even when multiple systems fail and environmental conditions create the worst possible scenario, proper training, quick thinking, and heroic dedication can still save lives and prevent what could have been an even greater tragedy. Emergency response procedures at airports worldwide were also enhanced, based on lessons learned from the Dubai Emergency Services response to Flight 521, with particular attention paid to coordination between different agencies and the importance of rapid response times in aircraft fire situations. The effectiveness of the Dubai airport emergency response became a model studied by airport emergency services globally, leading to improved training scenarios and equipment deployment strategies that could mean the difference between life and death in future aircraft accidents. Medical response protocols were also refined based on the injury patterns and treatment needs observed among the Flight 521 survivors, helping emergency medical services better prepare for the unique challenges of treating multiple patients with smoke inhalation, burn injuries, and evacuation-related trauma. The technological legacy of Flight 521 extended to aircraft design improvements as well, with Boeing and other manufacturers studying how the 777 structure performed during the accident and identifying areas where future aircraft could be made even safer during emergency situations. Emergency lighting systems, evacuation slide design, and cabin air filtration during emergency conditions all received additional attention from engineers and safety experts who wanted to learn everything possible from the accident. The aviation industry's commitment to continuous improvement meant that every aspect of the accident was analyzed for potential safety enhancements, from pilot training to aircraft design to emergency response procedures. The human stories that emerged from Flight 521 revealed the extraordinary courage and resilience of ordinary people faced with life-threatening situations. From passengers who helped elderly travelers navigate evacuation slides to flight attendants who risked their own lives to ensure everyone else escaped safely. These individual acts of heroism, often performed by people who had never faced such extreme circumstances before, demonstrated the best of human nature under the worst possible conditions. Survivors formed lasting bonds with fellow passengers and crew members who had shared the traumatic experience, many maintaining contact years after the accident and supporting each other through the psychological recovery process that followed their brush with death. The families of the survivors experienced their own emotional journey, from the initial terror of learning that their loved ones were aboard a crashed and burning aircraft, to the incredible relief and gratitude when they learned of the successful evacuation and survival of nearly everyone aboard. Many family members traveled to Dubai immediately after the accident to be reunited with survivors, creating emotional scenes at hospitals and hotels as families embraced loved ones they had feared were lost forever. The contrast between the initial reports of a catastrophic aircraft fire and the eventual news that 299 people had survived created a roller coaster of emotions that highlighted how precious life is and how quickly everything can change. Support groups formed among survivors and their families, providing ongoing assistance with trauma recovery and helping people process the complex emotions that followed such a life-altering experience. Many survivors reported that the accident had changed their perspective on life, making them more grateful for everyday experiences and more aware of how fragile human existence can be. Some became advocates for aviation safety, sharing their stories to help improve training and procedures that could save lives in future emergencies, while others preferred to move on quietly and rebuild their lives away from the public attention that surrounded the accident. The anniversary of Flight 521 became an annual occasion for remembering Captain Al-Shebli's sacrifice and celebrating the survival of the 299 people who owed their lives to the professionalism and heroism of the crew, who refused to abandon their duties even when facing mortal danger. Memorial services honored the captain's memory, while also recognizing the flight attendants and emergency responders whose actions made the survival story possible, creating a legacy of courage and professionalism that continues to inspire aviation professionals worldwide. If you've been captivated by this incredible story of survival against impossible odds, make sure to subscribe to our channel and hit that notification bell because we dive deep into aviation mysteries and bring you the untold stories of courage, tragedy, and the lessons that make flying safer for all of us. Your support helps us continue uncovering these important stories that honor those who gave everything in service of others. And every subscription, like, and share helps us reach more people who need to hear these remarkable tales of human resilience and professional dedication. Captain Khalid al-Shebli's ultimate sacrifice saved 299 lives that day in Dubai, reminding us that heroes don't always survive the day, but their legacy lives on in every safe flight that follows and every pilot who learns from their example. The passengers of Flight 521 went home to their families because of the split-second decisions and selfless dedication of their crew, proving that even in our darkest moments, human courage and professionalism can triumph over disaster and transform what should have been tragedy into one of aviation's greatest survival stories. This accident, while forever marked by the tragic loss of Captain al-Shebli, stands as one of aviation's greatest evacuation successes and a testament to the rigorous safety standards and extensive training that protect millions of passengers every day around the world. The lessons learned from Flight 521 continue to influence pilot training and emergency procedures globally, ensuring that future crews are better prepared for the unexpected challenges that can arise in the unforgiving environment of commercial aviation, where split-second decisions can determine who lives and who dies. The investigation findings, training improvements, and procedural changes that resulted from this accident have already prevented other potential disasters, making Captain al-Shebli's sacrifice meaningful beyond the 299 lives he directly saved that day in the scorching heat of Dubai's desert airport. As we remember those terrifying final moments aboard Emirates Flight 521, we honor not just the memory of Captain Khalid al-Shebli, but also the dedication of every aviation professional who works tirelessly to bring us safely home to our loved ones, no matter what challenges await them in the skies above or on the ground below. Their commitment to safety, their willingness to put others before themselves, and their refusal to give up even when facing impossible odds represent the very best of human nature and professional dedication. The story of Flight 521 will forever remind us that heroes walk among us every day, wearing pilot uniforms and flight attendant wings, ready to give everything to ensure that the miracle of flight remains as safe as humanly possible for every passenger who trusts their lives to commercial aviation.